Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Lady Maggie's Secret Scandal by Grace Burrowes. Narrated by James Langton. 1.
The blighted, benighted, blasted, perishing thing has to be here somewhere.
Maggie Windham flopped the bedskirt back down and glared at her wardrobe.
You look in there, Evie, and I'll take the dressing room.
We looked in the dressing room, Eve Windham said. If we don't leave soon, we'll be late for Mamma's weekly tea, and her Grace cannot abide tardiness.
Except in his Grace, Maggie replied, sitting on her bed. She'll want to know why we're late, and give me one of those "Oh, Maggie" looks.
They're no worse than her "Oh, Evie," "Oh, Jenny," or "Oh, Louisa" looks.
They're worse, believe me, Maggie said, blowing out a breath. I am the eldest. I should know better. I should think before I act. I am to set a good example. It's endless.
Eve gave her a smile. I like the example you've set. You do as you please. You come and go as you please. You have your own household and your own funds. You're in charge of your own life. Maggie did not quite return the smile.
I am a disgrace, but a happy one for the most part. Let's be on our way, and I can turn my rooms upside down when I get home.
Evie took her arm, and as they passed from Maggie's bedroom, they crossed before the full-length mirror. A study in contrasts, Maggie thought. They were the bookends of the Windham daughters, the eldest and the youngest. No one in his right mind would conclude they had a father in common. Maggie was tall, with flaming red hair, and the sturdy proportions of her mother's agrarian Celtic antecedents, while Evie was petite, blonde, and delicate. By happenstance they both had the green eyes common to every Windham sibling, and to Esther, Duchess of Moreland.
"Is this to be a full parade, Master?" Maggie asked as she and Evie settled into her town coach.
"A hen party. Our sisters ran out of megrims, sprained ankles, bellyaches, and monthlies, and Mamma will be dragging the lot of us off to Almack's directly. Sophie is lucky to be rusticating with her baron."
"I don't envy you Almack's."
Maggie did, however, envy Sophie her recently acquired marital bliss, envied it intensely and silently. "You had your turn in the ballrooms, Maggie, though how you dodged holy matrimony with both her Grace and his Grace lining up the eligibles is beyond me."
"Sheer determination. You refused the proposals one by one. And honestly, Evie, Papa isn't as anxious to see us wed as her Grace is. Nobody is good enough for his girls."
"Then Sophie had to go and ruin things by marrying her baron." Their eyes met, and they broke into giggles. Still, Maggie saw the faint anxiety in Evie's pretty green eyes, and knew a moment's gratitude that she herself was so firmly on the shelf. There had been long, fraught years when she'd had to dodge every spotty boy and widowed knight in the realm, and then finally she'd reached the halcyon age of 30. By then, even Papa had been willing to concede, not defeat, he still occasionally got in his digs, but truce. Maggie had been allowed to set up her own establishment, and the time since had seen significant improvement in her peace of mind. There were tariffs and tolls, of course. She was expected to show up at her Grace's weekly teas from time to time, not every week, not even every other, but often enough. She stood up with her brothers when they deigned to grace the ballrooms, which was thankfully rare of late. She occasionally joined her sisters for a respite at Moreland's, the seat of the duchy, in Kent, but mostly she hid. They reached the ducal mansion, an imposing edifice set well back from its landscaped square. The place was both family home and the logistical seat of the Duke of Moreland's various parliamentary stratagems. He loved his politics, did his Grace, and his Duchess. One of his meetings must have been letting out when the hour for her Grace's tea grew near, because the soaring foyer of the mansion was a beehive of servants, departing gentlemen, and arriving ladies. Footmen were handing out gloves, hats, and walking sticks to the gentlemen, while taking gloves, bonnets, and wraps from the ladies. Maggie sidled around to the wall, found a mirror, and unpinned her lace mantilla from her hair. She flipped the lace up and off her shoulders, but it snagged on something. A tug did nothing to dislodge the lace, though someone behind her let out a muttered curse. Damn it! Being a lady in company, Maggie decided she'd heard "drat it," and used the mirror to study the situation. Oh no! Of all the men in all the mansions in all of Mayfair, why him? "If you'll hold still," he said, "I'll have us disentangled." Her beautiful lacy green shawl had caught on the flower attached to his lapel, a hot pink little damask rose full of thorns and likely to ruin her mantilla. Maggie half turned, horrified, to feel a tug on her hair as she did. A stray pin came sliding down into her vision, dangling on a fat red curl. Gracious! She reached up to extract the pin, but her hand caught in the shawl, now stretched between her and the gentleman's lapel. Another tug, another curl came down. "Allow me." It wasn't a request. The gentleman's hands were bare and his fingers nimble as he reached up and removed several more pins from Maggie's hair. The entire flaming mass of it listed to the left, then slid down over her shoulders in complete disarray. His dark eyebrows rose, and for one instant Maggie had the satisfaction of seeing Mr. Benjamin Hazlit at a loss. Then he was handing her several hairpins amid the billows of her mantilla, which were still entangled with the longer skeins of her hair. While Maggie held her mantilla before her, Hazlit got the blasted flower extracted from the lace and held it out to her, as if he'd just plucked it from a bush for her delectation. "My apologies, my lady. The fault is entirely mine." And he was laughing at her. The great dark brute found it amusing that Maggie Windham, illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Morland, was completely undone before the servants, her sisters, and half her father's cronies from the lords. She wanted to smack him. Maggie instead stepped in closer to Hazlit, took the fragrant little flower, and withdrew the jewelled pin from its stem. "If you'll just hold still a moment, Mr. Hazlit, I'll have you put to rights in no time." He was tall enough that she had to look up at him, another unforgivable fault, for Maggie liked to look down on men, so she beamed a toothy smile at him when she jabbed the little pin through layers of fabric to prick his arrogant manly skin. "Beg pardon," she said, giving his cravat a pat. "The fault is entirely mine." The humour in his eyes shifted to something not the least funny, though Maggie's spirits were significantly restored. "Your gloves, sir." A footman hovered, looking uncertain, and very pointedly not noticing Maggie's hair rioting down to her hips. Maggie took the gloves and held them out to Hazlit. "Can you manage, Mr. Hazlit, or shall I assist you further?" She turned one glove and held it open, as if he were 3 years old, and unable to sort the thing out for himself. "My thanks." He took the glove and tugged it on, then followed suit with the second. Except his hand brushed Maggie's while she held out his glove. She didn't think it was intentional, because his expression abruptly shuttered further. He tapped his hat onto his head, and was perhaps contemplating a parting bow when Maggie beat him to the exit. She rose from her curtsy, her hair tumbling forward, and murmured a quiet "good day" before turning her back on him deliberately. To the casual observer it wouldn't have been rude. She hoped Hazlit took it for the slight it was intended to be. "Oh, Mags!" Evie bustled up to her side. "Let's get you upstairs before Mamma sees this." She lifted a long, curling hank of hair. "Turn loose of that mantilla before you permanently wrinkle it. And whatever happened to put you in such a state?"
"Not the darned thing to stare at a man's daughters under his own roof."
Lucas Denning, Marquis of Dean, kept his voice down, but Benjamin Hazlit heard him none the less. "You're happy enough to be staring," Hazlit said, taking his walking-stick from the footman. Dean glanced around. "Discreetly. Not like I want to leap upon the girl naked. What on earth did you do to that woman? Her hair is quite the most glorious thing I've seen outside a brothel in Cairo." Hazlit felt an abrupt need to plant his fist in Dean's handsome face. "Now who's being rude?" "We both are." Dean grinned momentarily, turning his severe Nordic features almost boyish. "But Lady Maggie never affords me more than a passing notice due to a family friend, so it matters little. Are you off to your club for a beefsteak?" "I am for home, and it's a pretty day, so I'll be on foot." "I could take you up. My tiger is walking my horses as we speak." "Thanks, but after sitting for 2 hours and listening to my betters pass the state of the realm, I can use some fresh air." They parted, Hazlit trailing after the guests who hadn't been detained by a red-haired Amazon bent on mischief. Except, to be fair, the whole little business had started without anybody intending anything, and it should have ended that way. Lady Maggie hadn't appreciated his nonsense with the flower, so she'd stabbed him with his own pin. She'd done him a favour, in truth, because his wits had gone begging at the sight of all that silky warm hair tumbling around her shoulders. He'd caught a whiff of her fragrance, a clean, bracing scent laced with cinnamon, and he'd tangled his fingers in a few long silky strands of her hair. The feel of it, sliding over his skin, had momentarily shut down his reasoning powers, something the lady must have sensed. He didn't often give offence to a lady, but there was something about Morland's bye-blow that threw him off stride and brought out the ungallant side of his nature. They'd met only a handful of times, for Hazlit generally avoided the ballrooms and soirees and Venetian breakfasts. His half-brother had recently become the first man to marry into the present generation of Windham daughters, making it even more imperative that Hazlit kept his distance. Socially, he had to keep a hand in, mostly for business purposes, but nobody was glad to see him arrive at their polite functions, and everybody was relieved to see him leave. The parliamentary matters were little better. On behalf of the Earl of Hazelton, for whom he ostensibly worked, he attended meetings such as Morland's earlier strategy session. Morland and a few of the senior titles knew better, but they kept their mouths shut. Miss Windham's mouth had been open. For just an instant, her jaw had dropped, presumably at the heat in Hazlitt's gaze. That was not well done of him. She was a lady, for all her unfortunate origins, and he was a gentleman, most of the time. He made his way to his townhouse in less than a half-hour, which really wasn't long enough to get the mental stench of the Duke's meeting out of his mind. Morland was a staunch Tory, though he had sympathy for the yeoman and could be surprisingly effective garnering votes from the moderates on even the most divisive issues. Still, Morland's meetings went on forever, and all too often degenerated into grumbling and finger-pointing. Hazlit handed his hat, walking-stick and gloves to his butler, glanced at the long case clock in his foyer, and headed for his library. There was still time to plough through several hours' worth of correspondence and reports prior to the evening's obligations. Before he sat at his desk, though, Hazlit scanned his shelves until he came across a volume of Wordsworth. He unfastened the little rose from his lapel and tucked it carefully between the pages of the book, then forced himself to get down to work. "Valentine!" Maggie flew across her bedroom, throwing her arms around the tall, dark-haired man who'd appeared unannounced in her chambers. "Oh, I have missed you so, you scamp, you scoundrel! When did you get back to town? And is Ellen with you?" He hugged her tightly, a good solid hug, as only a brother who'd been rusticating with his new wife since Christmas could deliver to his sister, and kept an arm around Maggie's shoulders as he walked her to a window seat. "Ellen accepted my plea for her to eschew travel," Valentine said. "She gave me a letter for you." Valentine passed her a single folded piece of paper. "Ellen is well?" Maggie asked, some of her joy dimming as she glanced at the pretty hand on Ellen's note. Ellen and Val had been married only a short time, and already they were in anticipation of a joyful event. She was happy for them, truly she was, also envious. "Ellen is quite well, though my own nerves are sorely tried to think of her increasing. But, Mags," he glanced around at the upheaval in her sitting-room, "have I come to town only to find my sister taking fits?" If Maggie Windham loved any men, it was the men of her family, Her father and brothers, Uncle Tony and her cousins, they were the best of fellows, but they fretted endlessly and called it doting on her, her sisters and the Duchess.
I've lost track of a favourite frippery. I got a little carried away searching for it.
I'll buy you another. I'm back in town to do rehearsals with the Philharmonic Society, but expect I've already been spotted by Her Grace's spies. I might as well take you shopping before I face the maternal interrogation.
You don't have to stay at the mansion. You could stay at Gale's place, since he and Anna have the room.
He said as much. Val rose and began to wander the room, putting things to rights. He was sinfully handsome, with emerald green eyes, sable hair just a tad too long, and hands that could conjure from any kind of keyboard the sweetest music ever played. But he had the Windham gift for fretting over family, probably amplified by impending fatherhood.
You are not my lady's maid, Val.
Maggie rose to straighten the pillows her searching had thrown into disorder. I'm your darling baby brother, he replied, holding up a dancing slipper with little roses embroidered on it. Lovely, but not very well used. Are you still impersonating a recluse, Mags?
I go out, she said,
folding an afghan over her fainting couch.
Her Grace will not permit me the privacy I'd choose, were I allowed.
Neither will I. Val held up another slipper. I'm attending the Winterthur's ball tonight. Say you'll come with me to be my protection. If I'd known how sincerely the merry widows considered married men fair game, I'd likely have declined tonight's invitation.
You'd best call on your mother before you show your face in public, Maggie warned. She could hardly sip her tea today. So anxious was she to interrogate you in person about your wife's well-being.
She's your mother, too. Val began draping silk stockings over the open lid of a cedar chest.
She is not my mother, Valentine. Those are my unmentionables.
He shrugged. I like unmentionables. I like pretty things and pretty ladies. Come dancing with me tonight, Mags. I won't go without you.
Very well. But you come by for me after you've made your bow at the mansion.
Fair enough. He smiled at her, wrapping a stocking around his neck and holding it up like a noose. If I tell Her Grace you're to come out socializing with me, she'll hardly let me finish my tea.
Stop disrespecting your sister's personal effects.
She snatched the stocking from around his silly neck.
And how are you, really? You look tired.
I'm working on a new composition, and it rather takes over my schedule. Ellen is very understanding, perhaps too much so. As he spoke, he picked up a little music box from Maggie's vanity.
You gave me that, she said,
watching those graceful hands of his lift the lid.
You're going to leave here without playing for me, aren't you?
You've heard me play probably more than any other single person on the face of the earth. Just hum a few bars of Beethoven. You'll hardly know it isn't me.
One doesn't hum Beethoven for pity's sake.
She cocked her head to study him, realizing that in some way her baby brother had grown up, grown more mature for taking a wife.
Ellen is truly well.
She assures you of as much in her letter. Val put the music box down, his signature smile in place. I got a letter from Dev before I left Belcanto. He passed Maggie a slim epistle that bore their oldest brother's slashing hand. He seems to be thriving with his womenfolk.
Then lucky Devlin.
But you miss him, don't you?
Of course I miss him.
Maggie plopped down on the bed, both appreciating and resenting Val's perceptivity.
We're close in age, and we share...
Bastardy. Val crossed the room to sit beside her, taking her left hand in his right. You've both been legitimated. You're adopted. You're accepted everywhere, and yet this haunts you.
It's different for a woman, Val. I can't buy my colours and guarantee my standing in the world by riding off to whack at Frenchmen. Devlin is a perishing earl.
He's still our brother. Val tucked a lock of hair behind Maggie's ear. And he specifically challenged me to look in on you and get your nose out of your infernal books. Spring is coming, Mags, and it's time to dance. It sounded not like a light-hearted invitation, but rather like a lecture. Gracious. She got to her feet.
Shoo! You have to pay a call on your mamma, and she won't want to let you out of her sight.
I'll come by at 8. But let's take your coach, he said, rising as well. Read Dev's letter. I'm sure he'll expect a prompt reply.
I'll read it, and I will see you at 8. But I don't intend to stay out all night, Val.
Nor do I. He was gone, leaving behind the peculiar sinking of spirit Maggie felt each time a member of her ducal family left her here, alone in her own quarters, just as she'd spent years begging and pleading for them to do.
"Good evening, Mr. Hazlit,"
the Winterfur's butler greeted him, though not in quite the stentorian tones the man might have used for the titled guests. It was the same in the receiving line, grudging, hesitant, but polite tolerance from those who knew not what to make of the Honourable Benjamin Hazlit. He preferred it that way, and it was better for business. He didn't pause at the top of the grand staircase when a herald all but muttered his name, but made his way quietly into the crowd milling under the enormous chandeliers.
"Hazlit."
Lucas Denning gave him a nod and a grim smile.
"I'd hoped the dancing would have started by now."
"I hear the orchestra tuning up, but the first sets always take a while to form. What social cataclysm has wrestled you from your club?" Dean ran a finger around his starched collar and glanced about at the ladies in their finery.
"Another lecture from my mother about duty to the succession. One might ask what social cataclysm has provoked your attendance. The hostesses never know whether it's a coup when you show up, or a reason to fret."
Hazlit took a half-step into the shadows under the minstrel's gallery and visually assessed his companion.
"We aren't all golden gods such as yourself. Given the title, it truly is a wonder you aren't married."
Dean shuddered, and Hazlit had the impression it wasn't entirely feigned.
"Don't say that word. I'm too young to be leg-shackled."
"It's the debutantes who are too young. We marry them off before they've put away their dolls."
"Think that way, and you'll soon be the one married off."
They fell silent as a footman approached, offering champagne from a carefully balanced tray. Dean tossed back his wine, then slunk off to the card-room, no doubt intent on avoiding the matchmakers. It was tempting to do likewise, but the evening was young, which meant nobody would be sufficiently inebriated to let slip the kind of information Hazlit came seeking. He made for the refreshment table and helped himself to a second flute of champagne, from which he drank nothing. Wallflowers and companions were a source of intelligence that often went unnoticed, so Hazlit scanned the ladies seated among the potted ferns and mentally started filling out dance cards. Abigail Norcross's companion, for starters, then the companion of Lord Norcross's current discreet interest, perhaps Norcross's widowed sister. That would likely bring him up to the supper waltz, and since there was no telling who might make a late appearance, he left his evening open thereafter.
"Helene, how nice to see you."
Maggie gave her friend's hand a squeeze.
"Budge over, so I can malinger among the ferns with you."
Helene obligingly scooted over.
"I saw you dancing with Lord Val. Brave of him to show his face without his new wife."
"He is brave. Braver than Maggie, in any event." She settled her skirts around her as she took the half of the padded bench Helen Norcross-Anders made available to her.
"Growing up the youngest of 5 brothers, Val is both cannier and more determined than some of his elders. Now, who has made a cake of themselves, and which gentlemen are on the prowl? You aren't a widow yourself, Maggie, to be taking such an approach to an evening of dancing."
"I'm not dancing." Maggie held up a slippered foot and wiggled her toes.
"And you're not spilling. Come, Helen, I'm stuck here until after supper. You might as well entertain me. The debutantes are all at Twitter because Dean's here, and word is he's looking for a wife."
"I like Dean," Maggie said. "He doesn't dissemble with a lot of flummery and false smiles."
"One hears he's particularly friendly with the fashionable impure," Helen said. "Were I them, I'd be snuggling up to Dean before many of his peers. There he goes now, and God help the twit on his arm. She looks like she went poaching for hares and got a boar in her gun sights."
"Naughty Helene." Maggie hid her smile by pretending to search in her reticule.
"The truth often is."
They chatted away for the balance of the first set. Helene was a pretty, well-to-do widow, and a few of the more determined fortune hunters tried to get her to stand up. Maggie watched her deftly turn them aside with polite excuses, but Helene adopted a different tactic when Benjamin Hazlit approached. And oh, didn't he look superb in his evening finery? Against his dark complexion and dark hair, his linen gleamed in the candlelight, and the gold of his stick-pin and cuff-links winked in coy contrast to his black evening coat. He was as well tricked out as any of the titles in the room, and he had the height and bearing to make evening attire truly magnificent. No rose, though. On his lapel was a bright red carnation. Maggie caught a whiff of the scent when he bowed over her hand. The hand he held just a moment too long, the idiot. "I was hoping Lady Anders might do me the honour of the supper waltz," Hazlit said. The smile he aimed at Helene dazzled, for all it didn't reach his eyes. "I promised this set to my brother," Lady Helene replied, her show of regret equally superficial. "Perhaps you'd lead Miss Windham out in my stead. She's been sitting here this age, good enough to keep a widow company amid all this gaiety." Maggie glanced at her friend, but saw only devilment in Helene's eyes. "Lady Magdalen," Hazlit held out a gloved hand, "may I have this dance?" The smile dimmed on his handsome face, and his gaze held hers. As much to get away from his inspection as anything, Maggie put her hand in his and rose. "I would be honoured." "Lady Helene, my thanks," he said, holding up his left hand for Maggie to place her fingers over his knuckles. "And it would be a blasted waltz." "You do not look honoured," he said, leading her to a position on the floor. "You look like you're plotting the end of an association with Lady Anders." "Helene has a peculiar sense of humour, but she knows I will retaliate at some point. I'll make her dance with his Grace, or perhaps with Dean." "That would set tongues wagging." He held out his left hand for Maggie to place her right in it. When she hesitated, he put her left hand on his shoulder and took her right in his. "Really, Lady Magdalen, am I so offensive as all that? Your parents allow me under their roof, and your sister was happy enough to marry my half-brother." His hand at her waist was warm, even through her gown and stays. "You enjoy being difficult," Maggie said, as the orchestra began the introduction. "It isn't becoming in a grown man. I'd take offence, but I suspect you're like this with most everybody." "I can be charming." "When it suits your purpose," she said, as the music began. "That isn't charm, Mr. Hazlit. That is guile." His rejoinder was to dance her around the room, holding her a little more closely than convention allowed, a little more firmly. She liked it. She was a good-sized female, and there were few enough partners with the height and presence to lead her on the dance-floor. Maggie didn't lead, though it was tempting with the more timid men, but she had to be careful she didn't turn too exuberantly, lean too much, step too far. Partners lacking in assurance could lose their grip on her, stumble, or tangle their feet with hers. Not Hazlit. He danced well, maybe even better than her brother Val, whom she would have said was her favourite partner. Before this obnoxious man floated her around the ballroom in his strong arms, his legs moving with hers so smoothly, Maggie never once had to look down. It was disconcerting to be handled with such confidence, and to like it so well. "Now I know how to still your sharp tongue." He spoke right into her ear, his cheek almost against her temple. If he moved any closer, they'd become objects of talk. "All I have to do is stand up with you, and your temper falls silent." "I don't generally dance." "I know, though I can't fathom why. You move like a sylph." "Are you teasing me?" "I am not." He pulled back to study her by the candlelight. "I've partnered many women, and you are an accomplished dancer." She relaxed a little at his words, because Hazlit might be a wretch, but he was an honest wretch. He'd tell her to her face when he was making fun of her. "I want you to promise me something," Maggie said. He spun her under his arm and brought her back to waltz position. Perhaps it was her imagination, but he seemed to be holding her just a bit closer.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?